Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Well, we have been covering the trial of James Craig, a Colorado dentist accused of poisoning his wife. We have waded through 2 weeks of emotional, just piles and piles of evidence that have been put on by the prosecution. And throughout that, I've been saying we've got to wait. Here on the channel, we fully believe in hearing from both sides. That's what we do. We wait for both sides to come in. And so today, after more bombshells were dropped, yet more came in from the prosecution rested and all eyes turned to the defense. What would they say? Would they maybe put James Craig on the stand, or maybe an expert? Maybe there would be some fat witnesses, family members, to talk about how nice he had been to them, or something related to his relationship with Angela. And the answer was a big fat nothing. Nothing at all. The defense simply rested without putting on any evidence at all. So before we even got to that moment, the day had already taken several wild turns. We heard about a secret journal that Angela kept, and the defense believes it's really important in their case. We had a ton of long, really hard-fought sidebars. We heard about a critical item that law enforcement let get gone and that isn't available as evidence for or against James Craig. And we got a multitude of stories from James Craig sort of laid out one beside the other, so we could look at the similarities or the differences. But when we turned to the defense, we did not get anything. They simply rested. Were they just confident that the prosecution had not met its burden of proof? That's what they said. Or did they just not have anything to say at all? And hugely important, what is the jury going to think about that choice that was made by the defense? So we are going to be breaking down the final day of testimony tomorrow, closing arguments in the case, and it will go to the jury by probably roughly tomorrow afternoon. Special to the first 5 in tonight's chat: Michael Lalonde, Betsy, Autumn Piper, Loretta Powell, and Oklahoma Gigi. Thank you everybody for being here. Would you please hit the like button? And if it will really help YouTube kind of wake up and notice that we're here. And also, would you subscribe? We would love to have you back for more. We cover all the cases everybody's talking about, and even some that not enough people are talking about, which I would describe this case as fitting in that. When we started the day, Detective Bobby Olson was back on the stand. She was still on direct examination from the state. And we got a few new facts. One huge set of facts came from a note that James Craig kept on his phone. It was actually labeled timeline, and it was the timeline of Angela's death. What was he thinking? I don't know. But here's what he said in this timeline. He said that she, meaning Angela Craig, wanted cyanide in capsules, and she wanted a syringe with potassium cyanide mixed into water as a backup. And he did that for her. Kindly, generously, as a loving husband, he filled capsules with the correct amount of medicine for her, and he also filled a syringe, all of those with potassium cyanide, 300 milligrams. And he said it was something like a dozen capsules. He said he reserved 4 that he knew were not tainted, and he used those as her first doses that he gave her, because it was acknowledged he gave her the initial doses. He gave her a dose at 10 p.m. on the 14th and at 4 a.m. on the 15th. It was on the 15th that Angela Craig went back to the hospital, University of Colorado Hospital. Within hours, she was brain dead on the 15th, and then life support was removed several days later after organs had been donated. But he gave those first capsules to her, but he said in no uncertain terms that he gave her untainted, not potassium cyanide, actual real capsules with clindamycin. He had prescribed clindamycin to her as a medication she would need to help her with the illness she had been having for several days. So he wrote this timeline note on March 16th at 1:03 a.m. By now, Angela has just been declared brain dead. He did not have access to his residence. Police were searching through it. They had cordoned it off. The family was not allowed back in until they completed their search. So the family went to stay with friends. And they did find clindamycin in the home at 8 a.m. on the 16th. Unfortunately, they did not know about this timeline note. They did not know how important the clindamycin would be, how important capsules would be. And unfortunately, they did not pick that up. So it's shown in photographs sitting there beside Angela's side of the bed. And you actually have an officer pick it up and they photographed it, but they didn't look inside it. They didn't test it, and they didn't take that bottle of pills. Well, unfortunately, once they saw the note, they went back to get the clindamycin, and it wasn't there anymore. They specifically got a search warrant so they could go back into the home and pull that clindamycin. And bottom line, when they went back in, it wasn't there. They found clindamycin, but it was an old prescription from 2019. It wasn't the new one that James Craig had just prescribed for Angela. So obviously, what the prosecution is suggesting is that he was concerned that law enforcement might find the cyanide in the capsules. And this note was his way of talking his way out of it and putting all the blame on Angela. But okay, yeah, if you might find my fingerprints on the capsule with the cyanide, but it wasn't my idea. I was just doing this for her. It was her idea. She's the one who took them. I didn't do any of that. So I think the prosecution is going to say that's why the bottle disappeared, and that's why he's writing this note on his phone and coming up with a story that he thinks will explain what has happened. He also specifically admitted in that to preparing a syringe with cyanide. Now, he gave a pretty detailed timeline of everything that went wrong for her. And he said that he believed that on March 15th, he believed she must have had eye drops to drink in the morning. Remember, one of the things that had been purchased was multiple 9 bottles of Visine, which do have a chemical in them, tetrahydrozoline, a poison. And so he's suggesting she drank one of those in the morning. That actually fits with what law enforcement found, because next to her side of the bed, they found a pink topped shaker bottle, and it tested positive for residue of tetrahydrozoline in the bottom. There were still images that the prosecution put into evidence that showed James Craig himself handling that shaker bottle on the 14th and on the 15th, the exact days it would have been given to her, and that it would have been the tetrahydrozoline. When she got to the hospital, she in fact had enough tetrahydrozoline in her system to kill her, according to an expert that the prosecution put in. So he said the 15th, I think she drank eye drops, and that would explain. We can now look backwards and say why there was tetrahydrozoline in the bottle. And then he said at 10 a.m., her brother gave her 2 pills of clindamycin, and it must have been the ones with the cyanide. In other words, and it was one of the most difficult things to process, I think, because Angela Craig's brother got on the stand. He and his wife had come from a long distance driving. It took them like 12 hours to get there. It would normally be less, but they drove a long way in order to help, because it was so difficult for it was so difficult for them to. I'm looking over here and seeing about the internet, and I'm concerned. Yes, it is the fastest internet that is available. So I am really sorry if it's slow. And I do have the 100-foot cord that is directly into the modem, but this is what we got. Trust me, I called can discuss this at length this weekend with AT&T, but there you have it. All right, so we were talking about the clindamycin. So the brother talked about how James Craig wrote, don't forget to give her medicine, don't forget. And so he gave her the medicine. And what that was like for him was so difficult because, and you could tell that from his testimony on the stand, because he knows he probably gave her poison that actually ended up harming her. Blood tested at the hospital showed she did have cyanide in her system, an amount that could kill her. But prosecutors also believe that she was given more while she was at the hospital, and that James Craig is the one who did that while he was alone in her hospital room. So the defendant, James Craig, insisted that she get those pills, but that wouldn't explain what happened at the University of Colorado when in the emergency room. He actually wrote in this note that he had on his phone, he wrote that in the emergency room, it looked like Angela was probably going to pull through and be okay. Things looked better. Things were looking up. And he says that when no one else was in earshot, she asked him to help her finish the job. And the defendant was, the prosecutor went through the timeline that we've seen in video as well as testimony and said, the defendant wasn't alone with Angela until he told the brother, you can go now. I got it. I'm in charge. And so, we see the defendant walk out with the brother, and then he comes back in. He is only in for 60 seconds, 1 minute. He comes running out and says, she says her arm hurts, to the nurse at the station. And then they all go running in, and there is no saving her from that point on. She had a complete crash. And that is the moment in time when everything went wrong. And from that moment on, she was never okay. So the defendant, in this 60 seconds, he was the only one in the room. Well, what the prosecution believes is that during that 60 seconds, he administered potassium cyanide to her, which does work very quickly. In the note, he acknowledged that that's what happened during that 60 seconds. He doesn't limit it to 60 seconds, but during that period. But what he says is he had brought this syringe for Angela that she had asked him to prepare. He said, I'm not going to give it to you. He turned his back to her, and he turned around, and he heard her saying her arm hurt. So he turned around, looks at her, and sees an empty syringe sitting right by her IV. And he puts it in his pocket and tells the nurses. So he was only in the room for a single minute. And he admits, says the prosecution, preparing this potassium cyanide. And is it really reasonable that Angela gave it to herself? That's what the prosecution argument is. But he does say in that note, James Craig does, that must have done the trick because I don't think she ever regained consciousness. But I didn't administer any of that to her. She did it to herself. And he says, I guess she miscalculated how much she had consumed, but he does admit having actually prepared it. To me, that's pretty damning testimony or a statement from him. And that's really damning. Even if he didn't administer it, just the idea that for his wife of 23 years, the mother of his 6 children, he's just joyfully mixing up poisons. Hey, here's some. Hey, I'll have this. Let me make sure you have the exact correct dose. And if you bring it to you at the hospital. But the prosecution took this through the various stories that he had told different people. Here's what he told, because this sounds like, well, this is intentional, unaligned by Angela on purpose. She did it to herself. She wanted it. She administered this on her own. That's the hospital story, what's written in that note on his phone. Next is what he told his daughter in a letter he wrote her from jail. And he said he figured it was an accidental overdose by Angela. She hadn't meant to. She just took too much because everyone pretty much takes a little poison here and there, but she just took too much of a good thing, so to speak. He also talked about the story of the prosecution did about the story James Craig told his business partner, Ryan Redford, also a dentist. And he called it a game of chicken with Ryan Redford. So it's kind of like, well, we were going to play Chutes and Ladders. We considered Monopoly or checkers. Instead, we decided to play Poison Our Wife. And that's what we did for fun last Friday night. And that's the argument. I mean, that's actually what he told the business partner he was doing. It's never been explained what exactly the rules of this game would be, but it was some game that ended up with Angela Craig dying. So fourth story would be what he told a man named William Walben in a letter. Now, William Walben had been in jail with James Craig. They had met there, and he wrote a letter to William Walben. Now, in this letter, he had various descriptions of evidence he wanted changed, some planted evidence, things he wanted to suggest so he can maybe get out of this potential prison sentence he was facing. And in this letter, he sent it to William Walben, but it was returned address unknown or addressee no longer available. It was returned to the jail, and someone at the jail, because it was returned, opened it, read it, and as a result, they learned about what he had written. So in this letter, he wrote that he believed all of this was a plot by Angela. It wasn't just Angela wanting to harm herself. She wanted to do that and make sure that James Craig took the fall for it. And that's what this was all about. The prosecution cleaned up a few facts for the jury, too. For example, there's been a lot of talk about oleander, and the jury asked a couple of questions about it. The detective went ahead and said, yeah, it was not delivered. So at no point did she get oleander, at least not from anything James Craig ordered. They talked about Casey Bohannon. He is another inmate that, according to the prosecution and according to Casey Bohannon, that James Craig tried to hire to plant some evidence, specifically a journal that Angela supposedly wrote out that would admit that she was doing all this to herself and to set up James Craig. So Casey Bohannon knew some facts, like, for example, what is that type of truck that James Craig drove? The defense wasn't much impressed with that as unique, surprising information, but that was the defense was just trying to the prosecution was trying to shore up his testimony. And I think they mentioned at this point a person named Roderick, alias Roger Crittenden, and that person wasn't there. And at no point did they testify in the trial. And they even said, a person, did you interview this person? Information. I wondered, there were two people today. One of them could potentially be one of the witnesses who was supposed to show. All we got was a request from the prosecution who said, hey, there's this witness. He's in a wheelchair and he was staying at some kind of facility, and he left the facility. So now we can't get hold of him, and we're not able to get him here. He's supposed to be here for his testimony, and we thought we could just go pick him up, and he's not there anymore. He left, and they ended up getting a warrant for him from a bench warrant from the judge. But at no point did anyone who was in a wheelchair testify. So I assume this person never came. I called it the world's longest sidebar. They argued over this a really, really long time. Whoever Crittenden is, that's who it was someone pretty important, at least from the prosecution's point of view. And then obviously the defense wanted that out. They admitted a bunch of timelines into evidence that were like a little timeline for this day, but probably is for closing argument, and we didn't actually get to see them. They didn't put them up, so we don't have any access to that. I've been working on our timeline, and it's a massive undertaking. They're getting this case done so quickly. I'm hoping I can get it all done, but it's this case absolutely cries out for a timeline. One of the most amazing things I think it's going to be when we watch was ordering poison and talking to Angela and talking to the mistress, all of that happening all in the same time frame. I think it's going to be remarkable to see that. Okay, so on cross-examination, the defense pointed that this witness, Detective Bobby Olson, she's the one who wrote that affidavit that became very public. And the defense went, it was in the media, it was on the news, there were details out there that shouldn't have been out there and normally wouldn't, right? And the detective was like, yeah, normally we would not put that out. And normally, I agree that we want to keep that stuff confidential so that we can make sure that if witnesses come to us and claim they have information, we know they really do have information, not just they saw it on the news and are kind of coming alongside what they've already heard. And so one of the reasons the defense is pushing on this so hard is they believe that Casey Bohannon just took stuff he heard from the news and then brought that to law enforcement, packaged up as something James Craig had told him. And they want to say that Casey Bohannon really got this whole idea just by reading the affidavit or hearing about it on the news. So, and just some of the strangest strategy ever, this case is way upside down, just totally upside down. So, and normally for the defense, if you had a serial cheater and liar who was a defendant, you would be trying to keep that evidence out. You would be filing motions in limine that, oh, it's irrelevant to all these people this person had an affair with. What does that have to do with whether he killed Angela? And sure, he lied in 2019, but that is irrelevant to whether he lied or hid poisoning in 2023. So that you can't put that in. Normally, that's what the defense would be arguing. But here, the defense is coming in like, look at this guy. He had more affairs than you can possibly count. And he'd been doing it for years and years and years. And that's the evidence the defense is putting in. Their argument, their reasoning for this is to suggest that there was no real reason to just suddenly kill Angela Craig. Why? He'd been cheating for 20 years. What did it matter if he was cheating with one more? It wasn't like Karen Kane was somebody special. Everybody he was dating at that moment, and there were 6, according to a note he wrote, all of those people, those women, he treated similarly. He said the same things to all of them. That's another thing I want to see if we can find in our timeline, if we can uncover that. But that he was dating in just the same time frame, just about Carrie Hegeseth from The Office, Elizabeth Gore, Karen Kane, and a new person was introduced, Michelle Pope, who had flirty texts with him, although they may not have had an actual relationship other than through the text messages. And the defense says, and to Detective Olson, this is the defense. This is James Craig's lawyer, says to Detective Olson, and this is just 4 that you were able to find, right? And, here's this other one. She was at least flirty with him, right? And Detective Olson said, well, I do feel like it was deeper with Karen Kane than with the other people. There was more reciprocation from her. Their conversations were a little different. But under defense questioning, Detective Olson said, yeah, I do acknowledge that the way James Craig talked to Karen was pretty much exactly the same way he talked to all of these women. It's just that Karen liked it more than some of the other women did, or she responded more. And it went at least 10 years back, whereupon a defense pulled out Angela Craig's journal to prove it went back more than years, that he'd been cheating the entire marriage. It is such an unusual strategy, but what they're trying to say is, if this is something that's gone on for 20 years and she still hasn't left and she's sticking around for him, and because that's what she believes religiously, what's he worried about? Just let her stay. What does it really matter? And at that point, they ID'd Angela Craig's journal. They do have one really important point on this journal. This journal was not something that law enforcement found. They searched the house, of course, but they did not find this journal. Instead, her family found this journal, we heard in testimony, when they searched a storage unit. Well, the defense said there was no storage unit. There was no storage unit until after they cleared out the house to sell it. That's when they got a storage unit. They didn't already have a storage unit where the journal was. So that left a little bit of confusion. But also the argument that the defense is making is that this journal didn't come straight through to the defense, or to the prosecutors, I should say, to law enforcement. Instead, the family made copies and gave that to Detective Olson. And I guess they're hinting maybe you didn't get it all. Maybe there's more in there. Maybe there's something important. Also, it ended in 2018. This is 5 years before the poisoning, 5 years before Angela's death. It ends. Now, Detective Olson said, well, it ended, but it was blank pages at the end, as if, it ended because she stopped keeping a journal, not because something's missing, taken out by the family. And the defense got up and said, yeah, but what you got was a copy, and they made a copy of a blank page at the end, but you don't really know because you haven't seen the original. You don't know that there were pages at the end or how many there were. And it was all a pretty good argument by the defense, I thought. So another super long sidebar on this. So we actually heard some of the excerpts from Angela's secret journal on January 8th of 2009. Now, think about this. This is 14 years before she is going to die of poisoning. And she writes, I feel so lost and so alone. The further into this process, the less able to forgive I am. Literally physically ill, and just seems to be getting worse. Looking at him today, since she talked about looking at him today, and I couldn't feel any love. I feel abused, worthless, and unloved. Where do I find my marriage again? Thank you, Sissy. I appreciate that. On January 13th, so this is all still the same episode, I guess you would call it. And the defense again, not the prosecutor, is saying, look, he cheated on her back in 2009, and look how hurt and surprised she was. And yet what happened? So on January 13th, the defense lawyer called it, she put kind of a religious slant, he called it, on her feelings about Jim. Now, she was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Some people call it Mormon. That was an older name, or LDS. And the defense lawyer was suggesting her beliefs around her religion, one, it made her not divorce James Craig, even though she technically could have, even though he was so bad, that her beliefs caused her to stay with him. That was the defense argument. But that she had been aware that James Craig had been having affairs for many, many years. And they went on to quote some more of these. I mean, these were quotes put in by the defense, mind you. I feel really sad, depressed, no hope. I feel like the good times were a lie. There is a hope for eternity, but the good times were a lie. And then at a later date, she writes, he doesn't love this one. He doesn't love me. I don't blame him. I failed him. He doesn't know how great he is. I didn't tell him. I have news for Angela. He is fully aware in his own mind of how great he is. There is nothing she needed to tell him to convince him any more of his greatness. So I don't believe that she bore any fault at all for him not believing enough that he was really great. I just don't see that for her. In 2018, then, this is 9 years later, she's writing, he's been having an affair for 6 months. He won't admit it. And talked about him meeting with his new addiction counselor last night. And the addiction, as we understood later, was sex addiction, not any type of substance. And she wrote in March of 2018, he loved her. Did he hold her hand and talk to her about everything, or was it all about the sex? Did he talk to her like she was magical? Did he buy her gifts? Did he send her flowers? What was so amazing about her that he didn't want to give up? It almost killed me when he said he didn't love me and I wasn't enough. Nell's going, leave, leave. But no, she did not. As the defense pointed out, she stayed. Thank you, Jodsy. I appreciate that very much. In April of 2018, she wrote, I've been meeting weekly with the therapist for about 5 weeks. Afterwards, all I want to do is crawl into bed and cry myself to sleep. I haven't decided yet if I should give in or push through. But the defense says they get through it. They stayed married. And the sort of background story the defense is giving is this is because of her religion. She stays in it. That journal, as I said, ended in 2018. So there wasn't anything about what had happened more recently. We do know from text messages that Angela was very upset because she had found him cheating. We also found that out from a woman. He was taking a skiing trip to Idaho in December, that she was in her car. They were in Idaho together. They had met on seeking.com for a sugar baby relationship, she described it. And she's in the car. He gets out and talks to his wife in Idaho in December. Surely that was cold. And talks to her for an hour and a half before getting back in the car and saying, gotta go. The wife knows where we are and what we're doing. And I gotta go home. I gotta go home right now. So then they read this text that James Craig wrote to Ryan Redford. Ryan Redford, again, his business partner, also a dentist. And the defense read this. I wrote, why is the defense reading this? But we'll talk about that. Let's see if I can make this any bigger. Okay, that's pretty good. All right, so it's a long text message. He writes, good morning. Thank you for taking my patient load today. I want to make an urgent plea to you. If we were ever friends, please do this favor for me. Please don't talk to anyone about what we talked about last night, including any law enforcement officers. You are under no obligation to answer their questions unless you are served a subpoena, and you will do more damage than good to my family by continuing to insert yourself into this. Angela is gone, and I am devastated. And this was written on the 16th. On the 15th was when she had that catastrophic crash, and the bishop is there at the hospital with him. He's there. His partner is there. His partner's wife is there. She has the crash, and they learn that she is not going to recover, that it's too late, that nothing can be done. But Angela is still alive in that she's being kept on life support, which that will be taken away a few days from then after the organs are harvested. And there is nothing that can bring her back. And I want desperately to tell you all of the details so that you can better understand what's gone on behind the scenes with her. There is so much that you don't know that I wish you did. If you knew everything, this would make so much sense to you, but there's no use in telling you right now. Why not? Why not? Why is there no use in telling him? Absolutely no explanation for that. And of course, no explanation for all of this stuff. He knows that if only Ryan Redford knew, he would understand. And by the way, the jury doesn't know it either because, again, not told. You and I have a history of you and the other partners and Jackie all talking about me behind my back and deciding what you think is best. And then you're always the fall guy that has pulled the trigger or tell me what you've all decided about me. In fact, yes, you didn't even come to me. I had to seek you out because James Craig from the medical professionals that they were now suspicious of poisoning from the husband, James Craig. You have never given me the advantage of talking with me first. You just decide and then act and hope I'll pick up the pieces later. This is a pattern in our business dealings, and now it's become a factor in our personal dealings. And let me ask you, would you please hit the like button? That'll really help our video. All right, let me paint a picture for you of what this has done. Yesterday, I had to tell my kids their mom was not going to wake up, and they were there to say their final goodbyes. That was at 6:45 p.m. The hospital said we could bring the kids up to say goodbye at that time. But because of the investigation, you open by your incomplete information, which he's still not offering to complete. The hospital made those poor, grieving, hysterical kids wait until after 10 to see their mom. After an hour or so of saying goodbye to her, we went home just before midnight, only to have our house sealed against our entry by the police. Instead of getting to go home and find comfort, they were met with flashing lights and cold, unfeeling cops, and the kids, scared and confused, had to go to sleep at the home of a ward member. Family is starting to come into town today, and I have to tell them that they can't come to my house and try to explain why. I have to hire a homicide attorney to make sure I don't end up being painted in the light that, some hungry DA is anxious to paint me in, because I am most likely going to be charged, even though that is absolutely not, all caps, what happened. Ryan, I understand why you did what you did. I do. I get it. But if you had come to me personally, man to man, instead of talking to everyone else about what you thought you knew, I might have let you in on some details that would have made you less likely to cause this horrible storm. Man, Ryan, if you had only, all caps, put me higher on your list of priorities instead of putting everyone else's opinions and gossip ahead of me. Now, what was this gossip he's talking about? It's the fact that the office manager said he told me a personal package was coming for him to the office and not to open it. The front desk accidentally opened it. They brought it to me, said, "What is this? What do I do with this?" I packaged it back up since he didn't want it open, and I put it back on his desk, but not before I saw the invoice and saw that it was potassium cyanide. I've now Googled that. I now know that potassium cyanide is a poison that causes exactly the symptoms that Angela Craig is dying from. All of that happened on the 15th. All right, keep reading. For that, I am very, very mad at you. I have talked to you about this multiple times, but you don't seem to care. And now what you thought was responsible has become reckless and so destructive. And so I'm asking, if there was ever any love in your heart for me, please don't make this any worse by talking to any officers or anyone else about this unless you are legally forced to. And whoever else on the team you think is going to be questioned, I would ask that you privately ask them to honor this request too. Also, please do not respond to this text message until I text you again. Obviously, the prosecutors believe this is a very blatant attempt to prevent people from going to law enforcement with the truth that would reveal that he actually ordered poison and that James Craig killed his wife, Angela. And there's nothing in there. Although he gaslights Ryan Redford a great deal about, there's all this secret stuff you don't know. At no point does he ever reveal that. I guess the secret stuff was the explanation that Angela wanted this for herself, that it was all her idea, that she did this to herself. All he did was order the poison, which she couldn't have gotten otherwise, and actually fill the capsules with the poison and actually make the syringe with the poison. But that's all. That's all he did. She did the rest from there. He simply made all of that available to her. All right. Now, the defense also talked about the fact, and thank you, Nell T. I appreciate that very much. I'm glad you're enjoying the trial. This is one of the wildest trials I've ever covered. Everyone should be fine. It's crazy. Anyway, all right. Jim Craig, and this remember that we're on the defense, so we're kind of jumping around a little bit in time, but this is the moment in time when Angela Craig is at the hospital for the last time. It's the 15th. She comes in. She is not dead or brain dead even. She hasn't had the catastrophic crash, But James Craig has left. He's gone back to his house, and he brings back bags of food. Now, does he also bring a syringe? We don't know, but they do have pictures of him carrying something to the bathroom and coming out carrying something in his hand. So that's the only thing we know about. It was described by the detective as a cylindrical something, and that it was clear or white. Jim Craig comes back to the hospital bringing food for her brother who was staying with her. And the defense says, look, here's something. He doesn't know that when he goes home, he'd better hide the evidence. He left the tetrahydrozoline bottle sitting out, and he left those pills of clindamycin sitting out. And if others of them had potassium cyanide in them, that could have been discovered by law enforcement. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But because law enforcement didn't take that bottle with them, and when they went back for it several days later, it was gone. But the defense says, look, if he went home, if he was really worried about this, he could have hidden the evidence right then and there, but he didn't. And this is because he didn't believe any of this implicated him, or maybe he didn't even know about it. On the 16th, is when they first began talking to James Craig, law enforcement, and at that point, Detective Olson goes to where he's staying with one of the ward members and knocks on the door and says, I've got a warrant, hand over your phone, hand over Angela's phones. And he does. He doesn't, force them. He just does it. And they say, and what's the password? And he gives that to them. And at that point, he didn't know she was going to come. And so again, the defense is suggesting he voluntarily handed these over to you, and he didn't even have time to delete anything because he didn't know you were coming that morning. And he gave you the password to his laptop. They also talked about a number of items that weren't collected by law enforcement. Huge red letter one is the clindamycin bottle that didn't get collected. And that was still left out on the nightstand when Dr. Craig got home midday, because he was at the hospital. And when he went to get food for the brother, he offered during this trip, he went home. He said to the brother, I'm going to the office, but he didn't go to the office. Instead, he went home, picked up food, and then came back to the hospital. And during that time, the defense is saying he could have gotten rid of stuff, but he didn't. And that means he wasn't guilty. He didn't feel any need to get rid of this. And other things, they argue, might have helped with his defense that law enforcement never collected. A huge one being all of the computers there in the home, and there were a ton. I think they pointed out probably 6 or 8 computers that you could see. You could see an iPad in the bathroom, the master bathroom, and you could see a bottle of water on the stationary bike. Nobody took that. There was a picture of Angela Craig in bed with a laptop during this period when she was sick, and they didn't know if they had that laptop or not. There were syringes in the bathroom that were connected to medication that you do give by syringe, and that was right there. So then there was one really super interesting defense argument that they made. Arsenic is one of the poisons that James Craig ordered, and they had super clear testimony about the fact that the post office delivered mail like to the right of the house over here, and then the post, they actually had video from the front of the house. Here goes the postal truck, out comes James Craig, comes back carrying mail, and that's the exact day the arsenic was delivered to the mailbox. So the argument being James Craig ordered it under his name, paid for it, and he went and collected it. And in fact, Angela had elevated arsenic by the time they tested when she was in the hospital. And he even said that was the first thing that she took some arsenic. But they pointed out arsenic is a metal. So there was a picture of James Craig making something in the microwave and mixing something. The prosecution believes he was making Angela workout shakes or smoothies and giving them to her. Hi, honey, here you go. And he was giving those to her, and they were poison. He was putting poison in them so that she would drink it. And they say, well, you can't put metal in a microwave, and arsenic's a metal, so that couldn't have been arsenic, could it? I tried to look that up. I'm sure I'll be readily convicted if anything ever goes wrong with anyone around me. But it comes in a powder, so I'm not really sure that it would explode. And arsenic is supposedly non-flammable. I mean, when you're Googling, would arsenic explode in the microwave? All you get is little statements like, do not ever try this. What are you doing with arsenic? I'm like, all right, I just need to know. Asking for a friend, right? So I don't know the full answer on that, but I don't think we're going to try and experiment. This is not going to be a green chili chicken enchilada kind of thing going on here. We're just going to know that might not be the case. The judge sustained an objection saying, how does this witness know whether it would explode in a microwave? But I guarantee you it was already planted in the jury's mind, because they do know that in general, you can't put metal in a microwave. And they won't be able to Google like I did, although they also won't find anything very helpful if they do, because who before in time has ever microwaved arsenic? I guess no one. So they also, the defense pointed out that at no point did law enforcement find empty bottles of eye drops sitting around, like a trash can full of empty bottles of Visine. They just didn't find that. They did search James Craig's work laptop. There were two computers that they looked at. One was his work laptop, and the other was that infamous computer in exam room 9. That's where all the really damning searches were found. What they found on his work laptop was really searches like, what does it mean when the systolic and diastolic are close together? Which, by the way, you would think James Craig would know that. I get that he's a dentist, but still, you would just think he would know that. How to raise blood pressure. Is low blood pressure dangerous? Again, is a dentist really going to search that? What to know about low blood pressure. And all of these searches happened on March 9th, around the time that Angela had low blood pressure. So I think what the prosecution is suggesting is by the way, this was put in by the defense. And the reason they were doing that is saying, look, you may have seen these really bad searches in exam room 9, but who knows who was down in exam room 9 searching for this stuff. Over here on his work laptop, James was diligently hoping he could help his wife with her low blood pressure and just doing very ordinary searches. Unlike in exam room 9, where there were searches like how much to kill somebody, how long to die from, that kind of search. So they're saying, look, he's over here. We don't know who did that, but over here on his computer, he's doing the thing that you would expect a caring husband to do, which is looking for how to help his wife with low blood pressure. I think the prosecution will argue, this is a setup. This over here, those, first of all, aren't ones he would, is low blood pressure dangerous? Well, yeah, it's dangerous. And somebody who's a dentist and has medical training is not going to question that. They're going to already know that. That's just a setup. Over here in exam room 9, so they're kind of, what I would guess they're going to suggest is he went running from room to room. Like over here, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll was a good one, right? Dr. Jekyll, how to help someone with low blood pressure. Mr. Hyde, how to kill somebody by giving them low blood pressure. Running back and forth from room to room, doing these different searches. So on March 6th, at 7:28 a.m., so this goes back to her first time she was sick, he was searching 9 causes of dizziness and blurred vision, all about vision. And eyes moving slow, lethargic, weak symptoms. That's on the laptop. That's another thing. We got to put that in the timeline. Here's what he's searching on his main one. Here's what he's searching over here in exam room 9, or what someone is searching in exam room 9. All right. Detective And they did get into a little bit into that video from the kitchen. We had already heard that they were not able to find anyone to download the computer and to look at the data. They wanted someone who was normally doing that, but they felt like they were in a big hurry and it was going to be weeks until anyone could get to it to help them. So they did it themselves, putting it on a computer. They watched it with body cam and they put it up on a screen in a conference room there at the police station. We'd already been through that. They did manage to make a point, but it just didn't really go anywhere. Repeatedly, we've heard the defense question the law enforcement officers about, you say you just took his computer and all of a sudden the Jim and Waffles account just popped right up. It turns out it wasn't quite that easy. They had to get a password for exam room 9. They had to get that from the people who worked there. It was just a generic staff password. So they had to get that. And then they had to go into Google. They had to go to search history. But up at the top of Google, there was a J. This was his account. So they clicked on that and it took them to Jim and Waffles. It kind of took a while to go through this, but it seemed to kind of fall flat. There wasn't some evidence that they had done something like created these searches and made it up or created this Jim and Waffles account. Plus, all of the people who have testified have talked about how he wrote them on the Jim and Waffles account. We saw the emails from Jim and Waffles account that were sent to, for example, Midland Scientific when he was trying to buy the potassium cyanide. So it didn't really go anywhere, but I think that was it was an argument they were trying to make. Thank you, Mildred. Just Mildred. I completely agree with you. Unbelievable case. I lack adjectives for this case. It is unbelievable. Okay, they also got into, remember that what we were told was after James Craig, and this is prosecution story, after James Craig administered potassium cyanide to his wife right there in the hospital, in that 60 seconds he was alone in the hospital with her, that you see him on video, hospital video, you see him walk down the hall away from her room as everyone descends on her room to help her, and you see him turn down the hall. And we heard from Detective Olson that there's nothing down that hall. There's not a bathroom. There are stairs you could take, and there is the main hospital sharps container where you would put shots, where you would put any kind of sharp device that's been used with patients. So it would be highly contaminated, and they put things like that there. There's also one, the defense pointed out, right there in the room. One thing that that law enforcement did not do is search in that sharps container. And we heard several for that. One, they did not yet know. They had not yet seen his phone, and they didn't have that note where he said he took a syringe to the hospital and that Angela administered it to herself. They didn't have that. And so what they had instead was when they found that out, that was several days later. But also, she said that they considered looking for that, but it was going to be really dangerous due to the biohazard. And she said, I, for one, didn't really want to dig through that. And also the lab refused to just accept something that had been used with patients. They just said that was too dangerous. So there wasn't really going to be any way to do that. And they didn't actually look at that. Now, the defense, you could have at least opened up the sharps container there in the room just to see if there was something a little different looking in there that didn't match what the hospital had. But how is that going to help? Because how is that going to prove that Angela administered this to herself? It clearly would have had both Angela's and Craig's fingerprints on it. It's going to have his fingerprints. I guess if it didn't have her fingerprints on it at all, then maybe that would have been helpful for the prosecution. And if it did have Angela's, maybe that would have been helpful for the defense. So that there was a little there where maybe there could have been some evidence that they just didn't get. The defense also took us through a number of that video from the kitchen, through a number of times when James and Angela seemed affectionate with each other. Why? I've already said I have no idea why people would video themselves in their own kitchen. Why they would install a video camera to video themselves in their kitchen. But they did. And there were some where they looked like they were intimate or loving with each other. I don't mean that they were doing anything inappropriate. I just mean that they were, or appropriate. I guess they were married, but they weren't. They were just, beside each other, seemed to be getting along. At one point, he touched her back area. They seemed loving to each other. That was the point that was being made. And on March 7th, which is the day after she first got sick, and a day when she went to the urgent care, they were sitting right next to each other on the couch and looking at a computer in front of them, maybe Googling her symptoms. Who knows? Huge point that I did think was a real hit for the defense. That life insurance policy. Now, we have been told that James Craig was not doing well financially, and Angela Craig represented $4 million in life insurance. And wow, that could solve a lot of problems. Well, what the defense said was that life insurance policy was old. It wasn't done recently. And there were mirror policies, $4 million on Angela and $4 million on James. They both had $4 million policies. So it wasn't as if he went out and insured her a whole bunch right before he decided to poison her. Also, they had, at the time, they had a fully paid off house. They were regularly paying all their bills. They did not have creditors out there, other than apparently they did owe money to the IRS, but that may just have been regular taxes. There were no collections that were going for them. Their monthly bills were all being paid. They weren't worried about cars being repossessed, and their home was worth $1 million and it was fully paid off. So how much of a need did he really have for this? They have that is really strong, I think, on the issue of motive. If the motive is to get money, that it wasn't a huge need. So the defense is pushing hard at motive. The idea that, first of all, she didn't represent any impediment to him doing whatever he wanted with as many women as he wanted. She'd been allowing this for 20 years. So why suddenly offer? And same with the question about the money. He didn't really need that much money. So what if she was worth $4 million dead? It wasn't really something he desperately needed. Not a reason to murder her. Not a reason that would give a motive for a crime like this. They also mentioned that they never really investigated Caitlin Romero, the office manager. She gave them a very selected set, and they did go into this on her cross, of text messages to show her back and forth with James Craig. And she told them that we had a non-sexual but sort of intimate relationship with each other. But she didn't give them all of her information, and they didn't really press. They didn't really investigate. They also never interviewed, I find this one really shocking, they never interviewed the person sitting at the front desk who opened that package marked Jim Craig personal that contained the potassium cyanide. The one where the office manager, they brought the silver canister to the office manager, and she's like, "What is this?" She went and got the box, found out it was potassium cyanide, boxed it all up and put it back on his desk. But they didn't talk to the woman at the front desk who had opened the package. And it did seem like that might be something that would have been a nice T to cross on that. And they never got, I just find this really shocking. She went to the urgent care and I believe it was the 7th, and got the records from the urgent care that she went to. I don't know why they would not. Obviously, they didn't consider her to be so desperately ill that they sent her over to the hospital, but nonetheless, it is kind of that they didn't get that. They didn't get her therapist records, but those were from years ago, so probably not all that big a deal. They didn't look at video from the jail to see if what they were told by some of the inmates who supposedly know a lot about James Craig and all the shenanigans he was trying to pull with getting evidence planted. They didn't get video that might have proven that. Like one of them, Nathaniel Harris, said he followed me around like a puppy. Well, did he or didn't he? Maybe they could have gotten that from video, said the defense. Again, I put that on the smaller side. Then on redirect, they talked about those kitchen photos that were taken of Jim and Angela. And, the whole time he made, they were kissing before the Las Vegas trip. They were kissing afterwards. And according to James Craig, in that timeline he wrote, he says that he came home from Las Vegas where he had met Karen Kane and he asked for a divorce. And that's when Angela and he made this secret deal that she wanted to unalive herself and he would help her. But then here they are kissing, which undermines the defense argument as well as suggests that he was at a minimum gaslighting Angela, if not actually still involved with her. Let's see. We've already covered that. So I'm looking through my notes. Give me just a second. They talked about one thing he said in the note was that after he saw that Angela had administered this cyanide to herself, he put it in his pants pocket. And then what exactly happened to it, that was never known. And he didn't offer an explanation for what he had done with this empty syringe. Already talked about Angela's journal. I'm zipping through my notes. So then we got to the surprise moment of the day. I've been telling you all, we have to wait. We have to hear from both sides. We fully believe in that here on this channel, but we didn't hear from the defense. Obviously, the defense never has to present a case. It's up to the prosecution to prove its case. And the defense rests on our right to force the prosecution to prove their case. We don't think they have, so we rest. I will say, though, that I think usually a jury expects something from the defense, an expert, a family witness who will kind of humanize the defendant, somebody, hopefully a fact witness who can help with the defense and set out timeline or otherwise help the defendant. And they didn't do anything at all. Now, they probably couldn't put James Craig up if, depending on what he had told them, they might not be able to. And very wise anyway, very, very wise, put James Craig up. Although it would have been very interesting. I would have to say I completely agree with the decision. It would have been very interesting, but bad idea. But nobody else at all. So I think the jury will be disappointed with that. We heard that with the Lori Vallow Daybell case. They were disappointed that there wasn't something, give us something, give it the old college try, tell us why, give us something. And nothing happened. Now, they got into arguments right after that. They asked the court to dismiss one count in particular, not one of the most important, not the murder count, but it was count 4, which is solicit to commit perjury. He's got a couple of those. He's got two solicitations of murder, and he's got a tampering charge as well. So he's got a lot of different charges plus the murder. The others all stem from what he did in jail. So as far as the solicitation to commit perjury, they said all you've got is this handwritten letter that came back to the jail and was opened up by the jail. So was William Walben the person who was in the wheelchair and what never could be found to be brought to trial? I don't know, but they didn't bring him to trial. And the judge said, and the defense said, we'll rest on the evidence as to every other count. The judge said, well, as to all those counts, then yeah, there's been plenty of evidence. I'm going to let the jury make the decision. And as to that one count, I'm going to let the jury decide as to whether or not just writing a letter amounts to an attempt to persuade someone to do something, in this case, the solicitation. But the question was, if they, you know what, I'm going to take a little sip. I'm getting worn out. And okay. So I want to explain this a little better. I feel like I'm going to get you all lost as I get lost. The count was the solicitation to commit perjury. But part of what you have to have for that is you have to actually be attempting to persuade someone to do something. So if the letter never reaches Waldman and he never actually talks to Waldman, is it the tree falling in the forest? Was there really a sound from the tree? Was there ever an attempt to persuade if it never reached the person and they never heard this request? So the court said, I'm going to let the jury make the decision about that. They also added a 7th charge to the case. They split off manslaughter from murder, said that really needs to be a separate charge, not just lesser included. So they added that to the verdict form. And then there was finally an argument over a unanimity charge. And this is kind of interesting. I know that may sound a little technical, but the defense is arguing, we want them to not just agree that he's guilty. We want them to agree on how and why he's guilty. In this case, we want them to agree on what killed her and that he gave that to her. And the prosecution is like, well, there was arsenic, there was potassium cyanide, there was tetrahydrozoline. What do we care? The guy poisoned her 6 ways to Sunday. That's enough. And the courts pointed out that one of their witnesses said she had enough of both tetrahydrozoline and potassium cyanide in her system. Either of those, she had enough that would kill her, and much less 2 of them working together. And she had a fair amount of arsenic, but not as much as a lethal dose. So the prosecution said, look, this is all working together, and there's no need to tell the jury that you have to decide each little detail. They can figure all that out. The judge agreed with that. So tomorrow, closing arguments, we will be, my prediction is it will not be a super long deliberation by the jury, but we'll see. A lot of times in closing, the lawyers will ask them to look at certain evidence, and that can take some time, particularly if it's video evidence. So if they get asked to do that, I think usually jurors do, and they'll take the time to go through that evidence. So maybe a little bit of time. All right, let's do some questions. If you have a question, put your question marks at the beginning, and I will have a better chance of seeing it. I see immediately Sandy's, I'm already shocked. Yes, I am already shocked. I'm 2 weeks worth of shocked at this case. I'm just shocked. That is definitely the way to put it. Valerie, what about the conversation with his daughter? Isn't that an attempt to persuade or influence? It is, but there were 2 counts. So absolutely, you are correct, Valerie. But they were the only one they were trying to get out for a specific argument related to William Waldman, former inmate. All right. Freddie's cat, has James Craig been psychologically evaluated? I am not aware of that. No one made any kind of argument that he couldn't be tried because he was incompetent to stand trial, that he couldn't tell the difference between right and wrong, or that he was unable to assist his counsel. No one's made an argument like that I'm aware of. So as far as any other evaluation, I'm not aware of that. Mickey, how does the defense reconcile Angela's unaliving with her LDS faith if she was so devout that she wouldn't even divorce her philandering husband? That's a great question, Mickey. I don't think those fit, do they? Those are really different. But I think that's one of the things we see throughout is the defense's arguments sometimes are this way and that way. If you don't believe this, how about this? And so that actually a defendant's allowed to do that. They're allowed to make that argument. It's just harder to persuade people if you don't have a direct line between your argument and what you want them to conclude. If you give them alternatives, it can weaken your argument. So that's a good point. Can't answer that. Oh, such a nice compliment. Mindfulness says your chat is so lovely. Thank you. And that is such a shout out to y'all. It really is a great chat. Y'all are always thoughtful. You have funny comments. You're always kind to each other. I really appreciate that. And I want to give a lot of credit to Marlon and to Mama Pinks, our mods, who worked really hard to foster that and to make it a pleasant environment for everybody. So thank you. All right, Creative Chaos is testing him from Tbilisi, Georgia. Wow. But my question is about lawyer competency. If she doesn't put on any kind of defense, would she need something in writing from him to avoid future appeals? Interesting question. I don't think she would have to have something in writing. She would obviously want to discuss that with her client. Honestly, it doesn't matter what the lawyers do. The argument afterwards will be that there was a lack of competency, that the lawyers didn't give the full go to the defense. It's just always the argument. So that will happen. I think they're questioning it. There's nothing inherently wrong with not putting on a defense, a separate defense case. And they thoroughly question all of the witnesses brought by the prosecution. So I don't think that is very likely to be successful. That is something that's very likely to be argued. I don't think it's very likely to be successful. In this case, they've made a really diligent effort to combat each one of the things that the prosecution has put up. Liquidman.com wants to know, are the children still living in their house? My guess would be no. And the reason I think that is there was talk about how they got this storage unit, and I understood they were selling the house. So I don't think any of them still live in that particular house. I don't know that. That's just what I gathered from that testimony. Sandra, he bought the poison, gave it to her, didn't tell doctors or try to save her. She died. How is that not a confession? Right. Well, I think the defense would say that's more along the lines of manslaughter. Maybe that's not so much murder. But I think it's a very strong admission. And he even gave it to her at a time when he knew it would kill her. He planned it. He actually, according to what he said there, filled the syringe. I mean, it's very, very strong what he what he said in that note on his own phone. And he wrote that note himself. There's no argument suggested that anyone else wrote it. It was on his phone. And as far as anyone can tell, came directly from him. Idiot Wind. Is it problematic that the person who testified to the blood test results was not the person who conducted the testing, so method and procedure adherence can't be questioned? Got into a tiny bit of that today when they asked whether or not the law enforcement personnel had looked into whether or not there was a system there at the hospital to keep blood cold, because they went back and retroactively tested some blood they had saved. And law enforcement said no, but I don't think that's really going to go anywhere because the hospital has procedures that they follow. What they did to try to kind of bridge from all of this is they brought in the people who took the blood, and then they brought in people who tested the blood, and then people who took the blood from one place to the other or collected it and then sent it. So they tried to bridge the gap that way. I felt like they did a pretty good job. There was one nurse who waffled a little bit on it. She was asked about collecting the blood, and she said, well, okay, I might have collected it, but someone else wrote it down. And there was a little bit of confusion around that. I felt like they got it cleaned up well enough that it will survive any kind of questioning on appeal. So I think it'll be safe, but good question, Idiot Win. Paula, if he gets sentenced for murder and wants to appeal, can he claim ineffective assistance of counsel? That there will be a claim. I totally agree with all of you. There will be a claim about that. I just don't think it's very likely to be successful. Those are decisions that lawyers can make with their clients. And I mean, he sat right there. He didn't stand up and yell, what do you mean? What about my favorite 5 witnesses you failed to produce? There was nothing like that. So I think that it will probably be safe on appeal. That would be my guess. Thank you, Sycamore Sally. I appreciate that very much. Do you know if he received the insurance money, Pop-Tart? I wanted to know that too, because it would be there for the children. I don't know if there was any kind of invalidation of it because of the charges against him, or maybe they held it until then. But I think that I was very curious about that myself. I never heard an answer to that. All right, let's see. Tooth Sleuth Jules asks, I'm very curious how the children will be cared for now that their mothers died and their dad will likely be in prison. I don't know where the kids are right now. I don't know who actually has the children, but I do know that several of them, all but 2, I think, would be adults. Now, one might be more like 17, 18, and then 2 who are probably 12 or under, in that range. So they obviously have to be being cared for by family, but I don't know exactly members of the family. Any wants to know were the notes written contemporaneously, and I think you mean the note that was taken. I don't think you mean medical notes, although you might. I think you mean the note that was on his phone, and they probably did have an actual date that it was created, because I think they said it was March 16th at 1:03 a.m. that it was created on that date. So they do know the exact time, and it fits exactly with a description of what happened that day, just right before he wrote this on his phone. I don't know why he wrote that, but he did. All right, let's see. Why would the prosecutor agree to the manslaughter charge? CJG asks. I assumed that they just felt like there were grounds for it, and they didn't have any, excuse me, they didn't have a good excuse not to put that in there, that the other side wanted it, and it was a legitimate request, and so they felt like they should add it. I think they'll press hard tomorrow for a conviction on the murder charge. Does he have a public defender, or is this paid defense? I believe that these are public defenders. And let me rephrase that a little bit. I believe they're appointed by the court and paid by the court. I'm not sure that they work for the public defender's office. They may be private counsel, but they've been appointed by the court for purposes of this case. I believe his first lawyer was private pay and was someone he hired, but that lawyer quit on the day of the first trial without revealing exactly why, but citing some rules of professionalism that talk about how a lawyer can't be asked to do things that the lawyer believes are inappropriate, and cited those and asked to get out, and the judge let him. When this is over, will you be able to show the videos? Ask AV8 or, AV8 or, I get it. All right. I don't know. I was wondering that today. I was wondering if I would be able to get those from the court. I would really like to be able to get those, but I don't know the answer to that. Well, I will look forward to coming to you tomorrow. I don't know exactly what the timing will be. I will probably do a live stream when the jury comes back, which might not be our usual time. If they finish early, I like starting at 7 p.m., our customary time, instead of 8 or 8:15 Eastern time. But I just don't know. So be sure to not just hit the subscribe button, but turn the notifications on, and I'll try to give you a little notice about it. I also posted a couple of times today about the case. I'll do that again tomorrow. If we get any inkling about when the jury is going to come back, I'll try to let you know so you can know when we're going to go live. And be sure to hit the like button on the way out, and I will see you tomorrow.